Alright, guys. We're in The Hero of Ages, Big J Comfy. We are in The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, a Mistborn novel, #1 New York Times best-selling author. Killing the tyrant Lord Ruler was the right thing to do, wasn't it? What does it mean to be the hero of ages? Okay. We're doing chapter 78, and we're going to finish up the book and the epilogue today. Gosh. I don't usually do reading streams while on camera, so just be thankful I put socks on. It may seem odd to those reading this that Atium was part of the body of a god. However, it is necessary to understand that when we said body, we generally meant power. As my mind has expanded, I have come to realize that objects and energy are actually composed of the very same things and can change state from one to another. It makes perfect sense to me that the power of godhood would be manifest within the world in physical form. Ruin and preservation were not nebulous abstractions. They were integral parts of existence. In a way, every object that existed in the world was composed of their power. Atium, then, was an object that was one sided. Instead of being composed of half ruin and half preservation, as, say, a rock would be, Atium was completely of ruin. The pits of Hathston were crafted by preservation as a place to hide the chunk of Ruin's body that he had stolen away during the betrayal and imprisonment. Kelsier didn't truly destroy this place by shattering those crystals, for they would have regrown eventually, in a few hundred years, and continued to deposit Atium as the place was a natural outlet for Ruin's trapped power. When people burned Atium, then, they were drawing upon the power of Ruin, which is perhaps why Atium turned people into such efficient killing machines. They didn't use up this power, however, but simply made use of it. Once a nugget of Atium was expended, the power would return to the pits and begin to coalesce again, just as the power of the Well of Ascension would return there again after it had been used. Oh, that makes sense. Not a foot stream. Happen to have a foot on stream. Alright. That was the epigraph for chapter 78. This is, Sazed thought, without a doubt the oldest dungeon I have ever been in. Granted, it was only the second time he had been imprisoned. Still, he had observed several prisons in his lifetime and had read of others. Most were like cages. This one, however, consisted only of a hole in the ground with an iron gate covering the top. It's a Khandra prison. That's not going to hold him. Sazed scrunched down inside of it, stripped of his metal mines, his legs cramped. I still feel like he can break out. It's not like he has to slurp up a wall. He's like 6 times the size of a Khandra that would be trapped in there. Just like, oomph. Done. It was probably built for a Khandra, he thought. One without bones, perhaps? What would a Khandra without bones be like? A pile of goo? Or perhaps a pile of muscles? Either way, this prison had not been meant to hold a man, particularly not one as tall as Sazed, thank you very much. He could barely move. He reached up, pushing against the grate, but it was secure. Aw, bummer. A large rock held it in place. Oh, those guys ain't dumb. He wasn't certain how long he had been in the pit. Hours? Perhaps even days. They still hadn't given him anything to eat, though a member of the third generation had poured some water on him. Dazed was still wet with it. It's actually hilarious. We're feeding you. Dazed was still wet with it, and he had taken to sucking on the cloth of his robes to assuage his thirst. This is silly, he thought, not for the first time. The world is ending, and I'm in prison? He was the final keeper, the announcer. He should be up above, recording events. Because, truth be told, he was beginning to believe that the world would not end. He had accepted that something, perhaps preservation itself, was watching over and protecting mankind. He was more and more determined to follow the terrorist religion. Not because it was perfect, but because he would rather believe and have hope. The hero was real. Sazed believed that, and he had faith in her. He had lived with Kelsier and had helped the man. He had chronicled the rise of the Church of the Survivor during the first years of its development. He had even researched the Hero of Ages with Tyndall and taken it upon himself to announce Vin as the one who fulfilled the prophecies. But it was only recently that he'd started to have faith in her. Perhaps it was his decision to be someone who saw miracles. Perhaps it was the daunting fear of the ending that seemed to loom just ahead. Perhaps it was the tension and anxiety. Regardless, somehow, from the chaos he drew peace. She would come. She would preserve the world. However, Sazed needed to be ready to help, and that meant escaping. Wet stunts? He eyed the metal grate. The lock was of fine steel, the grate itself of iron. He reached up tentatively, touching the bars, draining a bit of his weight and putting it into the iron. Immediately, his body grew lighter. In Ferukimi, iron stored physical weight, and the gate was pure enough to hold a ferrochemical charge. It went against his instincts to use the gate as a metal mine. It wasn't portable, and if he had to flee, he'd leave behind all of the power he'd saved. Yet, what good would it be to simply sit in the pit and wait? He reached up with the other hand, touching the steel lock with one finger. Then he began to fill it as well, draining his body of speed. He instantly began to feel lethargic, as if his every motion, even his breathing, was more difficult. It was like he had to push through some thick substance each time he moved. He stayed that way. He had learned to enter a kind of meditative trance when he filled metal mines. Often he would fill many at once, leaving himself sickly, weak, slow, and dull-minded. When he could, it was better to simply drift. He wasn't certain how long the meditation lasted. Occasionally, the guard came to pour water on him. When the sounds came, Sazed would let go and huddle down, pretending to sleep, but as soon as the guard withdrew, he would reach back up and continue to fill the metal mines. More time passed. Then he heard sounds. Sazed huddled down again and waited expectantly for the shower of water. "When I sent you back to save my people," a voice growled, "this wasn't exactly what I had in mind." Sazed popped his eyes open, glancing upward, and was surprised to see a canine face looking through the grate. "And soon?" Sazed asked. The conjurer grunted and stepped back. Sazed perked up as another conjurer appeared. She wore a delicate true body made of wood, willowy and almost inhuman. And she held some keys. "Quickly, Milan," Tensoon growled with his dog's voice. He had apparently switched back to the wolfhound, which made sense. Moving as a horse through the sometimes steep and narrow tunnels of the homeland would have been difficult. The female conjurer unlocked the gate, then pulled it back. Sazed eagerly climbed free. In the room, he found several other conjurers wearing deviant true bodies. In the corner, the prison guard lay bound and gagged. "What's up, Boofir?" "Not them," Sazed. Oh, wait, I skipped a paragraph. "I was seen entering the homeland, Terraceman," Tensoon said, "so we have little time. What has happened here? Milan told me of your imprisonment. Kanpar announced that the first generation had ordered you taken. What did you do to antagonize them?" "Not them," Sazed said, stretching his cramped legs. "It was the second generation. They have taken the first captive and plan to rule in their stead." The girl, Milan, gasped. "They would never!" "They did," Sazed said, standing. "A fear for the safety of the firsts. Kanpar may have been afraid to kill me because I am human. However, the firsts—" "But," Milan said, "the seconds are Khandra. You wouldn't do something like that. We're not that kind of people." Tell that to Tensoon. Tensoon and Sazed shared a look. "All societies have people who break the rules, child," Sazed thought, "particularly when power is concerned." "We have to find the firsts," Tensoon said, "and recover the trust warren." "We will fight with you, Tensoon," one of the other conjurers said. "We're finally throwing them off," another said. "The seconds and their insistence that we serve the humans." Sazed frowned at this. What did humans have to do with this conflict? Then, however, he noticed how the others regarded Tensoon. Dog's body, he realized. To them, Tensoon is a revolutionary of the highest order, because of something Vin ordered him to do. The humans. Tensoon met Sazed's eyes again, opening his mouth to speak. Then, however, he paused. "They're coming," he said with a curse, his dog's ears flattening. "Oh, that's so cute." Why did he write that? So distractingly cute. Oh. Sazed spun with concern, noticing shadows on the rock wall of the corridor leading into the prison chamber. The chamber was small, with 6 or so pits on the cell floor. 6 or so pit cells in the floor. There were no other entrances. Despite their brave words, Tensoon's companions immediately shied back, huddling against the wall. They were obviously not accustomed to conflict, particularly with their own kind. Tensoon shared none of their timidity. He charged forward as soon as the group of fifths entered the room, ramming his shoulder into one's chest, howling and clawing at another. There is a conjurer who fits in with his people, poorly as I do with my own, Dazed thought, smiling. He stepped backward, moving up onto the top of the prison gate, touching his metals with his bare feet. Milan clutches her purse. The fifths had trouble fighting Tensoon. Oh, I zoomed in too much on the chat. And now it's going too fast. Whatever. The fifths had trouble fighting Tensoon. He had trained with Vin and was apparently quite confident in his dog's body. He kept moving, knocking them over. However, there were 5 of them, and only one Tensoon. He was forced to retreat. Oh man, if only they had 10 One-Soons, they'd be in much better shape. Wounds in his body close as he orders them, Sazed noticed. That must be why the guards usually carry hammers. Which made it fairly Sazed, dude. Which made it fairly obvious how one had to fight a Khandra. Tensoon backed up beside Sazed. I apologize. The dog growled. This isn't much of a rescue. Oh, wait. I apologize, the dog growled. This isn't much of a rescue. Oh, I don't know, Sazed said with a smile, the fifth surrounding them. You needn't give up so quickly, I think. The fifth's charged, and Sazed tapped iron from the grate beneath the bare feet. Immediately, his body grew several times heavier than normal, and he grabbed the Khandra by the arms, then fell on him. Sazed always said he wasn't a warrior. However, the number of times he'd said that, then been forced to fight anyway, made him think he was losing that excuse. The truth was, he'd been in far more battles over the last few years than he felt he had any right to have survived. Either way, he knew some rudimentary moves, and with both Farukami and Surprise to aid him, that was about all he needed. What's up, exact same? When did cozy visuals happen? A half an hour ago? 1 duck-sized Tensoon versus 10 regular-sized duck-soons. Tapping weight to increase the density of his body and of his bones, keeping him from damaging himself as he collapsed on top of the soldier. Dazed felt a satisfying crack as they hit the grate, Dazed's greatly increased weight crushing the Khandra guard's bones. They used stone true bodies, but even that wasn't enough. Dazed released his metal mine, then began to fill it instead, making his body incredibly light. He touched his foot to the steel lock and tapped speed. Suddenly, he was faster than any man had a right to be. He stood up, even as the other 4 guards turned toward him in surprise. He stopped filling his iron mine, regaining normal weight, then reached with a blurring speed to pick up the hammer of the fallen soldier. He didn't have enhanced strength, but he had speed. He slammed the hammer down on a Khandra's shoulder, growing heavier to add to the momentum of his blow. The Khandra's bones shattered. Sazed snapped his foot on the lock and tapped all of the remaining speed. He crouched, pivoting, and slammed his hammer into the knees of 2 Khandra who were trying to attack him with their own hammers. He cried out, falling as Sazed's speed ran out. He stood up straight. Tensoon was sitting atop the final guard, pinning him to the ground. Thought you were a scholar, the dog noted, his captive squirming. Sazed tossed aside the hammer. I am, he said. Vin would have fought her way free from this prison days ago. Now I believe we should deal with these. He waved toward the fallen fifths, who seemed to have quite a bit of trouble moving with their bones broken. Tensoon nodded. He motioned for some of his friends to help him with the one he was sitting on. They held the captive tentatively, but there were enough of them to keep the prisoner still. What have you done here, Forkud? Tensoon demanded of the captive. Sazed kept an eye on the other fifths and was forced to slam him out against one of them, breaking more bones as he tried to sneak away. Forkud spat. Dirty third, he muttered. What is this, Ender's Game? Kidding. Kind of. Alright. You are the traitor this time, Tensoon said, smiling slightly. Kanpar brands me a contract breaker. Then he overthrows the first generation? World weren't ending. I'd find that far more amusing. Now, speak! Sazed paused as he noticed something. The other cells on the floor were occupied. He leaned down, recognizing something about the muscles he saw inside. They were discolored and a bit deformed, like hanging moss. And soon, he said, looking up, perhaps the first generation is still alive. Come here. Then soon moved over, then looked down at the pit, frowning with canine lips. Milan, the keys! He rushed over, unlocking the grate. With some consternation, Sazed was able to determine that there were multiple sets of squirming muscles in the pit, each of a slightly different color. We need bones, Tensoon said, standing. Milan nodded, rushing from the room. Sazed shared a look with Tensoon. Must have killed the other conjurer in these cells, Tensoon said softly. Traitors to our kind, imprisoned endlessly. It was to have been my fate. Either way, it is clever. Everyone thinks that these cells hold dire criminals. It wouldn't be odd for the fifths to continue feeding them, and nobody would suspect that the occupants had been replaced with the first generation, assuming they didn't look too closely at the color of the muscles. We need to keep moving, Sazed said. Get to Kanpar. Then soon shook his head. Won't get far without the first to tell our story, Terraceman. Go and store more of your Farukami. We may need it. With that, Tensoon moved, crouching over their captive. You have two options, Forkud, he said. Either relinquish those bones, or I'll digest your body and kill you as I did Ulsir. Sazed frowned, watching. The captured Khandra seemed terrified of Tensoon. The fifth's body liquefied, and he moved slug-like away from the granite bones. Tensoon smiled. What is that for? Sazed said. Something Zane taught me, Tensoon said, his dog's body beginning to melt, the hair falling out. Nobody expects a Khandra to be an impostor. In a few moments, Forkud will here return to the second generation and tell him that the traitor Tensoon has been captured. I should be able to stall long enough for the first to regenerate. Take far longer than I do to make bodies. Dazed nodded. Milan returned a short time later with a large sack full of bones. And ironically, not the dog comes back with a sack full of bones. And Tensoon, having recreated Forkud's body with incredible speed, moved out of the chamber on his mission. Then Sazed sat down, removing the lock and holding it to use as a metal mind, using an iron hammer in the other hand to store weight. It felt odd to just sit there, but apparently the first would need a few hours to regenerate their bodies. Really isn't a rush, is there? Sazed thought. I have been the first generation here. Or, I have the first generation here. They're the ones I needed. I can continue to question them, learn what I want. Then soon we'll have Kanpar distracted. It doesn't matter what the seconds will be in charge for a few more hours. What harm could they possibly do? What indeed? I guess we're gonna have to find out. The couch is the best in this leg of the speedrun. That couch. Alright. Chapter 79. I believe that the Mists were searching for someone to become a new host for them. Power needed a consciousness to direct it. In this matter, I am still rather confused. Why would power used to create and destroy need a mind to oversee it? And yet it seems to have only a vague will of its own, tied into the mandate of its abilities. Without a consciousness to direct it, nothing could actually be created or destroyed. It's as if the power of preservation understands that its tendency to reinforce stability is not enough. If nothing changed, nothing would ever come to exist. That makes me wonder who or what the minds of preservation and ruin were. I wonder. I wonder if it has something to do with Cosmere 101. Regardless, the mist, the power of preservation, chose someone to become their host long before all of this happened. That someone, however, was immediately seized by Ruin and used as a pawn. He must have known that by giving her a disguised hemalurgic spike, he would keep the mists from investing themselves in her as they wished. The 3 times she drew upon their power, then, were the 3 times when her earring had been removed from her body. I said that 6 months ago. Thank you very much. When she had fought the Lord Ruler, his allomancy had ripped it free. When fighting Marsh and Fadric, she had used the earring as a weapon. And at the end, Marsh ripped it out, freeing her and allowing the Mists, which were now desperate for a host since Preservation's last wisp was gone, to finally pour themselves into her. That's the end. That's the leg end. Grandpa. Oh man, is it Christmas yet? We quoting Christmas movies? Why did I see that? Well, I'm gonna have the chat up on my TV, which is right there. But I'm gonna bring it up on my phone too. So I can only see a few lines at a time on the TV. You want Peter Falk? Oh, I didn't know Peter Falk wasn't alive. That would be nice. Alright. Oh, it's like all glowy on my face. Years ago? Alright, chapter 79, proper. Something changed. Vin arose from her contemplation of the world. Something important was happening. She didn't have enough experience to tell what it was immediately, but she did see Ruin's nexus suddenly shoot away. She followed. Speed wasn't an issue. In fact, she didn't even really feel like she was moving. She followed because that was how her mind interpreted the experience of instantly moving her consciousness to the place where Ruin had focused his. Ah. She recognized the area, the pits of Hathsin, or a place nearby. As a portion of her mind had noticed earlier, the pits themselves had become a massive refugee camp, the people there quickly consuming the resources that the terrace people had carefully stored. A part of her smiled. The terrace gave of their foods freely, helping those who had fled Luthadel. The Lord Ruler had worked to breed the terrace, so they were docile. However, he expected that in making his perfect servants, he would also create a thoughtful, kindly people who would give of their last flocks to help those who were starving. The thing that she'd noticed earlier didn't have to do with the terrace or their guests. She saw it as she drew closer. Shining blaze of something. Powerful, more mighty than the sun itself to her eyes. She focused on it, but could see little. What could shine so magnificently? Take this, a voice said. Find humans and trade for weapons and supplies. Yes, Lord Kanpar, a second voice said. They were coming from the center of the shining area. It was to the side of the pits, only a few minutes' travel from the refugees. Oh no, Vin thought, feeling a sudden dread. The foolish first have sat on this treasure for far too long, Kanpar said. You're the worst, Kanpar. With these riches, we could be ruling, not serving mankind. I thought we didn't want to change things, the second voice said. Wait a sec. Wait, what sec? Worse than Zane? No, not worse than Zane. He's the worst in this book. What, like, Kanpar just reminds me of like every spiteful foil in every TV show and movie. He's like the um he's like the guy like in the detective TV, like you have he's Lassiter. That's who he is. He's freaking Lassiter. Only more powerful and spiteful than Lassiter. And less buffoonish. But like just like his attitude toward Tensoon and although that's not really true. He's not Lassiter. Because Lassiter is actually a good cop. Yeah. You're right. Lassiter is actually a good cop, and he's good for the department. I'm trying to think of a direct parallel, but he just reminds me of the typical really spiteful foil to the hero, and he's always like making things worse because he's short-sighted and stupid. Other words that I can't think of a really good comparison, but yeah, definitely not Lassiter. Wrong. Timothy O'Mudson. He was a good actor. Everyone in that show is a good actor. And if you guys haven't, uh, yeah, I could see Umbridge. Timothy O'Mudson had a stroke. Yikes. If you guys have never seen it, you can. Han Parr is a villain. If any of you guys haven't already seen, you can go on YouTube and find it probably. James Roday's audition for Psych. It's so good. I'm sure Lamgren has seen it. All right, where were we? We were at Kanpar being the worst in this book, but not as bad as Zane. Oh, we didn't want to change things, the second voice said. Oh, we won't. Not quickly, at least. For now, just this small amount needs to be sold. Hidden beneath the ground, Finn thought, heightened mind making the connections. In a place that already shines because of the large number of metal deposits. Ruin would never have been able to know where the ATM was. The depth of the Lord Ruler's strategies amazed her. He had held on for 1,000 years, maintaining such an amazing secret, keeping ATMs safe. She imagined obligators communicating only on metal plates, giving instructions for the operations at the pits. She imagined caravans traveling from the pits, carrying ATM mixed with gold and coins to hide where it was moving and what exactly was going on. When she said ATM mixed with gold, at first I was thinking of Mal ATM. And like, did they actually smelt the Malatium and then later break it down? Is this a jet spoiler? But then I realized they probably just had like full size beads mixed in with gold nuggets and coins and stuff. But man, all right. You don't know what I do for mankind, the Lord Ruler had said. And I didn't, Finn thought. Thank you. She felt Ruin surge with power, and she blocked him. It seems simple, yeah. They probably didn't smelt them together. But man, what a great way to hide ATM that would be. Just turn everything into Mal ATM. Hi, Weasley. Alright, you can hang out, but you can't headbutt my book, okay? She felt Ruin surge with power, and she blocked him. But just as she had been able to get a tendril of power past Ruin to Elend, Ruin was able to get the tiniest thread through. It, it was enough for the one who had spoken, who was tainted with, who was, ah! It was enough for the one who had spoken was tainted with hemalurgy. The spike in each shoulder drew Ruin's power and allowed him to speak to their bearer. Kandra? Finn thought, her senses finally managing to peer through the ATM glare to see a creature with a translucent body standing in a cavern just beneath the ground. Another Kandra was crawling out of a hole nearby, carrying a small pouch of ATM. Ruin seized control of the Kandra Kanpar. The creature stiffened, his metal spikes betraying him. Speak of this, Ruin said to Kanpar, Vin feeling his words as they pulsed into the Kandra. Much ATM is there? What? Who are you? Kanpar said. Why are you in my head? Am God, the voice said, and you, mine. All of you are mine. Elend landed outside the pits of Hathson, throwing up a puff of ash. Oddly, some of his own soldiers were there, guarding the perimeter. They rushed forward, spears held anxiously, then froze when they recognized him. Lord Venture? One of the men asked with a shock. I know you, Ellen said, frowning. From my army at Fadrix. Send us back, my lord, the other soldier said, with General Demoux, to help Lord Penrod and Luthadel. Ellen glanced up at the night sky, speckled with stars. Some time had passed during his travel to the pits from Luthadel. If time were now passing normally, the night was halfway through. What would happen when the sun rose again? Yeah, what would happen? I was wondering that myself. Poor backside of the planet Scadrial, all getting scorched right now. Quickly, Ellen said. I need to speak with the leaders of this camp. Star, star, star. The return of the first generation was accomplished with as much flair as Sazed had hoped. The old Khandra, now wearing larger bodies, still bore the distinctive colorings and aged skin of their generation. He had feared that the ordinary Khandra would not recognize them. However, he hadn't counted on the long lifespans of the Khandra people. Even if the first had only emerged once every century, most of the Khandra would have seen them several times. I don't have a crocheted. Oh, it's right there. I have a coffee here. I can't. Oh man, I'd have some hot cocoa. I'd have to put. I guess I could do that. Just heat up some heavy cream, put some cocoa powder and erythritol in it. Sounds good. But I have 3-day-old coffee instead. Even if the first only emerged once every century, most of the Khandra would have seen them several times. Sazed smiled as the group of first moved into the main Khandra chamber, continuing to cause shock and surprise in the others. They proclaimed Khan Par had betrayed them and imprisoned them, then called the Khandra people to assemble. Sazed stayed back behind Milan and the others, watching for snags in their plan. To the side, he saw a familiar Khandra approaching. Keeper, Tensoon said. Oh, still wearing the body of a fifth? Though we need to be careful. There are strange things afoot. Such as? Sazed asked. Then Tensoon attacked him. Sazed started, and his moment of confusion cost him dearly. Tensoon, or whoever it was, got his hands around Sazed's throat and began to choke him. They fell backward, drawing the attention of the surrounding Khandra. Sazed's assailant, bearing bones of rock, weighed far more than Sazed and was easily able to roll to the top of his hands, his hand still on Sazed's neck. Tensoon? Milan asked, sounding terrified. It's not him, Sazed thought. Can't be. Keeper, his assailant said between clenched teeth. Something is very wrong. You're telling me, Sazed tried to grasp for breath, reaching toward the pocket of his robe, struggling to grab the metal mine lock inside. I can barely keep myself from crushing your throat right now, the Khandra continued. Something has control of me. It wants me to kill you. Pretty good job, Sazed thought. I'm sorry, Tensoon said. That's what Marsh said. it's what Sazed, too. All these people under Rowan's control trying to kill Sazed, apologizing. The first had gathered around them. Sazed was barely able to focus, panic controlling him as he fought a much stronger, much heavier foe. He grabbed hold of his impromptu steel mine, but only then realized that speed would do him little good when he was being held so tightly. It has come then, whispered Haddock, leader of the first. Sazed barely noticed as one of the other first began to shake. People were crying out, but the blood thumping in Sazed's ears kept him from hearing what they were saying. Haddock turned away from the gasping Sazed, and then, in a loud voice, yelled something. The resolution has come! Above him, Tensoon jerked. Something within the Khandra seemed to be fighting. Tradition and a lifetime of training warred against the control of an outside force. Tensoon released Sazed with one hand, kept choking him with the other. Then, with his free hand, Khandra reached toward his own shoulder. Sazed blacked out. Yeah, that's the fifth generation voice. The fifth generations are all like dumb muscleheads. All right, chapter 80. Yeah, if only they had resoluted when they were supposed to, then there wouldn't be all this trouble ensuing. The Conjure people always said they were of preservation, while the Koloss and Inquisitors were of ruin. Yet, the Conjure bore hemalurgic spikes just like the others. Was their claim then simple delusion? No, I think not. They were created by the Lord Ruler to be spies. When they said such things, most of us interpreted that as meaning he planned to use them as spies in his new government because of their ability to imitate other people. Indeed, they were used for this purpose. But I see something much more grand in their existence. They were the Lord Ruler's double agents, planted with hemalurgic spikes, yet trusted, caught, bound, to pull them free when Ruin tried to seize them. In Ruin's moment of triumph, when he'd always assumed the conjure would be his on a whim, the vast majority of them immediately switched sides and left him unable to seize his prize. They were of preservation all along. Chapter 80. The terracemen did a good job with this place, my lord, Demo said. Ellen nodded, walking through the quiet nighttime camp with hands clasped behind his back. He was glad he'd stopped to change into a fresh white uniform before leaving Fadrix. As it was supposed to, the clothing attracted attention. The people seemed to take hope simply from seeing him. Their lives had been cast into chaos. They needed to know that their leader was aware of their situation. The camp is enormous, as you can see, Demo continued. Several 100,000 people now live here. Without the terracemen, I doubt that the refugees would have survived. As it is, they manage to keep sickness to a minimum, to organize crews to filter and bring fresh water to the camp, and to distribute food and blankets. Demo hesitated, glancing at Elend. Food is running out, however, the general said quietly. Apparently, when he discovered that Penrod was dead and that most of Luthadell's population was at the pits, he decided to keep his men there to help. They passed another campfire, and the people there rose. They watched Elend and his general with hope. At this campfire, Demo stopped as a young terrace woman approached and handed him and Elend some warm tea to drink. Her eyes lingered fondly on Demo, and he thanked her by name. The terrace people were affectionate toward Demo. They were thankful to him for bringing soldiers to help organize and police the massive refugees. The people needed leadership and order in these times. I shouldn't have left Luthadel, Ellen said quietly. Demo didn't respond immediately. The two of them finished their tea, then continued on, walking with an honor guard of about 10 soldiers, all from Demo's group. The general had sent several messengers back to Elend. They had never arrived. Perhaps they hadn't been able to get around the lava field, or perhaps they had run afoul of the very same army of Koloss Elend had passed on his way to Luthadel. Those Koloss, Ellen thought. The ones we drove away from Fadrix, plus more, are coming directly in this direction. There are even more people here than there were in Fadrix. They don't have a city wall or many soldiers at all to protect them. Have you been able to figure out what happened in Luthadel, Demo? Ellen asked, quietly, pausing in a darkened area between campfires. It still felt so strange to be out with no mist to obscure the night. He could see so much further. Yet, oddly, the night didn't seem as bright. Penrod, my lord, Demo said softly. They say he went mad. He began finding traitors in the nobility, even within his own army. He divided the city, and it turned into another house war. Almost all of the soldiers killed one another, and the city half burned down. The majority of the people escaped, but they have very little by way of protection. A determined group of bandits could probably wreak havoc on this whole group. Ellen fell silent. House war? He thought with frustration. Ruin using our own tricks against us. It's the same method Kelsier used to seize the city. My lord, Demo said tentatively. Speak, Ellen said. You were right to send me and my men back, Demo said. The survivor is behind this, my lord. He wanted us here, for some reason. Ellen frowned. What makes you say that? These people, Demo said. They fled Luthadel because of Kelsier. He appeared to a pair of soldiers, then a group of people in the city. They say he told them to be ready for disaster, and to lead the people out of the city. It's because of them that so many escaped. Those two soldiers and their friends had supplies prepared, and they had the presence of mind to come here. Ellen's frown deepened. Yet, he had seen too much to reject even such a strange story. Send for these men, he said. Demo nodded, waving for a soldier. Also, Ellen said, remembering that Demoe and his men had been sick from the mists, I was just going to say, if anyone here has any allomantic metals, pass them out to your soldiers and have them ingest them. My lord? Demoe said, confused as he turned. It's a long story, Demoe, Ellen said. Suffice it to say that your god, or somebody, has made you and your men into allomancers. Divide your men by the metal it turns out they can burn. We're going to need all of the coin shots, thugs, and lurchers we can get. And all you smokers and seekers can go sit on your thumbs. Sazed's eyes fluttered open and he shook his head, groaning. How long had he been out? Probably not long, he realized as his vision cleared. He'd passed out from lack of air. That kind of thing usually only left one unconscious for a short time, assuming one woke up at all. Which I did, he thought, coughing and rubbing his throat, sitting up. The Condra cavern glowed with the quiet light of its blue phosphorescent lanterns. But by the light, he could see that he was surrounded by something strange. Mystery. The cousins of the Condra, the scavengers that hunted at night and fed on corpses. They moved about Sazed, masses of muscle, flesh, and bone, but with those bones combined in strange, unnatural ways. Feet hanging off at angles, heads connected to arms, ribs used like legs. Except these bones were not actually bone at all, but stone, metal, or wood. I wonder what happened. Sazed stood up solemnly as he looked over the remnants of the Contra people, littered across the floor among the jumbled mass of mysteries, who oozed about like giant translucent slugs, were discarded spikes. Contra blessings, things that had brought them sentience. They had done it. They had held to their oath, and they removed their spikes rather than be taken over by ruin. Sazed looked over them with pity, amazement, and respect. The Atium, he thought. They did this to stop Ruin from getting the Atium. I have to protect it. Did the Conjure remind you of Wally? Or aluminums? See. I have to protect it. He stumbled away from the main chamber, regaining his strength as he made his way to the trust warren. He paused, however, as he approached, noticing sounds. He peeked around a corner and looked down the corridor through the open trust warren doorway. Inside, he found a group of Kandra, perhaps 20 in number, working to push back the plate on the floor that covered the ATM. You idiots! Of course, they didn't all become mysteries, he thought. Some would have been outside of the hearing of the first, or wouldn't have had the courage to pull their spikes free. In fact, as he thought about it, he was even more impressed that so many had obeyed the command from the first generation. Sazed easily recognized Khan Par directing the work inside. The Conjure would take the ATM and would deliver it to Ruin. Sazed had to stop them, but it was 20 against 1, with Sazed having only one small metal mind. It didn't seem like good odds for him. However, then Sazed noticed something sitting outside the doors of the trust warren. A simple cloth sack of little notes, save for the fact that Sazed recognized it. He'd carried his metal mines in it for years. They must have tossed it there after taking Sazed captive. It lay about 20 feet down the corridor from him, right beside the doorway into the trust warren. In the other room, Khan Par looked up, staring directly toward Sazed's position. Ruin had noticed him. Sazed didn't pause to think further. He reached into his pocket, grabbed the steel lock, and tapped it. He rushed through the corridor on inhumanly quick feet, snatching his sack from the ground as Condra began to cry out. Sazed snapped open the sack and found a collection of bracelets, rings, and bracers inside. He dumped them out, spilling the precious metal mines to the floor and grabbing two particular ones. Then, still moving at blurring speed, he dashed to the side. Steel mine ran out. One of the rings he grabbed was pewter. He tapped it for strength, growing in size and bulk. Then he slammed the doors to the trust warrant closed, causing those trapped inside to cry out in shock. Finally, he tapped the other ring, this one iron. He grew several times heavier, making himself into a doorstop, holding the massive metal doors to the trust warrant closed. It was a delaying tactic. He stood, holding the doors shut, his metal mines depleting at an alarming rate. They were the same rings he'd worn at the siege of Luthadel, the ones that had embedded within him. He'd replenished them now from following the siege, before he'd given up on Farouk and me. They would not last long. What would he do when the conjurer burst through the door? He searched desperately for a way to bar or block the portal, but could see nothing. And if he let go for even a moment, the conjurer inside would burst free. Please, he whispered, hoping that, like before, the thing that listened would give him a miracle. I'm going to need help. Part of me is wondering what's going on in Urto, but also part of me realizes that that's like the least important subplot and don't really care as much. I'm curious, but I feel like it's not going to have that much of an impact. The end of Wally. I've never seen it. The cat's on the other. You can't see the cat. There it is. It's not that I don't care about it. It's that it doesn't strike me as very relevant. Like that subplot doesn't seem very relevant compared to everything else that's going on right now. I think that like trying to think back on Well of Ascension and in Well of Ascension and in Mistborn, I feel like all of the subplots had kind of equal weight. And like you could see where everything was going and not predict the end, but what I mean is you could see the relevance of every jeez. You could see how everything was relevant and impacted the finale of those two books. I swear it was him, my lord, said the soldier, a man named Rittel. I've believed in the Church of the Survivor since the day of Kelsier's own death, my lord. He preached to me, converted me to the rebellion. I was there when he visited the caves and had Lord Demoux fight for his honor. I'd know Kelsier like I'd know my father. It was the Survivor. Ellen turned to the other soldier, who nodded in agreement. I didn't know him, my lord, said this man. However, he matched the descriptions. I think it really was him, I do. Ellen turned to Demoux, who nodded. They described Lord Kelsier very accurately, my lord. He is watching over us. Ellen. A messenger arrived and whispered something to Demoux. The night was dark, and in the torchlight, Ellen turned to study the two soldiers who had seen Kelsier. They didn't look like highly reliable witnesses. Ellen hadn't exactly left his best soldiers behind when he'd gone campaigning. Still, others had apparently seen the survivor too. Ellen would want to speak with them. He shook his head. Where in the world was Vin? Vin is the world right now. Ellen, telling you, she's like kind of omnipresent right now. Actually, not she's not omnipresent, but she can transport her consciousness wherever she wants at will, at least within this planet. Did she like go to? Did she like go say hi to Raoden? Like, yo, what's up? Sorry you tripped and fell in that pool. Let's see. My lord, Demoux said, touching his arm, looking concerned. Ellen dismissed the two soldier witnesses. Accurate or not, he owed them a great debt. They had saved many lives with their preparation. Is this the part where Vin goes to Elantris and like Vin transports her consciousness to Elantris and and pushes Raoden into the pool? That's what happened. That's my new head canon. While she's figuring out her godlike superpowers, she accidentally transports over to. Sorry, you tripped and fell in that pool. Sorry, I took a video of it. Uploaded it to you. Oh boy. Yakety sax. Okay. Scout's report, my lord, Demoux said, face illuminated by a pole-top torch flickering in the night breeze. Those Kolas you saw. They are heading this way, moving quickly. Scouts saw them approaching in the distance from a hilltop. They could be here before the night is over, Ellen cursed quietly. Ellen. He frowned. Why did he keep hearing his name on the wind? He turned, looking into the darkness. Something was pulling him, guiding him, whispering to him. He tried to ignore it, turning back to Demo, and yet it was there in his heart. Come. It seemed like Vin's voice. Gather an honor guard, Ellen said, grabbing the torch by its shaft, then throwing on an ash cloak and buttoning it down to his knees. Then he turned toward the darkness. My lord, Demo said. Just do it, Ellen said, striding off into the darkness. Demo called for some soldiers, following in a hurry. What am I doing? Ellen thought, pushing his way through the waist deep ash, using the cloak to keep his uniform somewhat clean. Chasing at dreams? Maybe I'm going mad. He could see something in his mind, a hillside with a hole in it. A memory, perhaps? Had he come this way before? Demo and his soldiers followed quietly, looking apprehensive. Ellen pushed onward. He was almost stopped. There it was, the hillside. It would have been indistinguishable from the others around it, except there were tracks leading up to it. Ellen frowned, pushing forward through the deep ash, moving to the point where the tracks ended. There, he found a hole in the ground, leading down. Cave, he thought. Perhaps a place for my people to hide? It wouldn't be big enough for that, likely. Still, the caves Kelsier had used for his rebellion had been large enough to hold some 10,000 men. Curious, Elend poked down into the cave, walking down its steep incline, throwing off the cloak. Demo and his men followed with curiosity. The tunnel went down for a bit, and Elend was surprised to find that there was light coming from ahead. Immediately he flared pewter, growing tense. He tossed aside his torch, then burnt tin, enhancing his vision. He could see several poles that glowed blue at the top. They appeared to be made of rock. What in the world? He marched forward quickly, motioning for Demo and his men to follow. The tunnel led to a vast cavern. Ellen stopped. It was as large as one of the storage caverns. Larger, perhaps. Down below, something moved. Ist wraiths? He realized with a surprise. Is this where they hide? In holes in the ground? He dropped a coin, shooting himself through the poorly lit cavern to land on the stone floor a distance away from Demo and the others. The mist wraiths weren't as large as others had seen. And why were they using rocks and wood in place of bones? He heard a sound. Only tin-enhanced ears let him catch it, but it sounded distinctly unlike a sound a mist wraith would make. Stone against metal. He waved sharply to Demo, then moved carefully down a side corridor. At its end, he stopped in surprise. A familiar figure stood against a pair of large metal doors, grunting, apparently trying to hold them closed. Sazed? Elend asked, standing up straighter. Sazed looked up, saw Elend, and was apparently so surprised that he lost control of the doors. They burst open, throwing the terracemen aside, revealing a group of angry, translucent-skinned Kandra. Your Majesty, Sazed said, do not let them escape. Demo and his soldiers clanked up behind Elend. That's either Sazed or Kandra who ate his bones, Elend thought. He made a snap decision. He trusted the voice in his ear. He'd trust that this was Sazed. The group of Kandra tried to get past Demo's soldiers. However, the Kandra weren't particularly good warriors, and their weapons were made of metal. It took Elend and Demo all of about 2 minutes to subdue the group, breaking their bones to keep them from healing and escaping. Afterward, Elend walked over to Sazed, who had stood up and dusted himself off. How did you find me, Your Majesty? I honestly don't know, Elend said. Sazed, what is this place? The homeland for the Kandra people, Your Majesty, Sazed said, and the hiding place of the Lord Ruler's ATM horde. Well, if Ruin didn't know before, he knows now. But I'm pretty sure he knew before. Elend raised an eyebrow, following Sazed's pointed finger. There was a room beyond the doors and a pit in the floor. Great, Elend thought. Now we find it. You don't look too excited, Your Majesty, Sazed noted. Kings, armies, Mistborn, even Kelsier himself have been searching for this cache for years. It's worthless, Elend said. My people are starving, and they can't eat metal. This cavern, however, it might prove useful. What do you think, Demo? There are any other chambers like that first one, my lord. It could hold a substantial percentage of our people. There are 4 large caverns, Sazed said, and 4 entrances that I know of. Elend turned to Demo, who was already giving orders to his soldiers. We have to get people down here before the sun rises, Ellen thought, remembering the heat. At the very least, before those Koloss arrive. After that, well, they would have to see. For now, Ellen had only one goal: survival. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick break. Just the bio. Give me just a quick. So part of the thing with Urto is like, on one hand, I'm like, it doesn't seem that important, so I don't really care as much. But on the other hand, it's like something better happened to make Urto more important than it's been so far. Otherwise, it seems like kind of a waste of time to focus so much on it. I mean, I liked the story, but it was overshadowed by the world ending and stuff. The the one thing, the like only really significant thing to have come out of that story, Rafo. All right, I'll Rafo right now. You guys can watch it happen. The one significant thing that so far happened out of Urto was that Spook wrote that note that Marsh seized, and that kind of helped him understand what was going on. And I actually have a question. I wouldn't have expected a Steel Inquisitor to be able to read a note on a sheet of metal. Or wait, I guess it makes sense because they can perceive the metal. Yeah, it makes sense. But now I'm wondering, would a Steel Inquisitor be able to read a note that's written on paper? Yeah, but like, I would figure. I was thinking like it would be like, bleh, it'd be like so bright. It would be like trying to read white text on a white background or something. But it's like indented. Like it makes sense. Even he could probably feel it with his hands. He could like rail it up. So that's fine. But yeah, can Steel Inquisitors read paper? What's up, Kiptan? Are there tiny bits of metal in paper? Although, wait, no. There would be tiny bits of metal in whatever they use to write the text. So even if you couldn't like really see the paper too well, the words would probably glow on the paper. Yeah, that's true. All right, I take back everything I said about Steel Inquisitors being able to read. Should be able to, even on paper. Chapter 81. Snapping has always been the dark side of allomancy. A person's genetic endowment may make them a potential allomancer, but in order for the power to manifest, the body must be put through extraordinary trauma. Though Ellen spoke of how terrible his beating was, during our day, unlocking allomancy in a person was easier than it had once been, for we had the infusion of preservation's power into the human bloodlines via the nuggets granted to nobility by the Lord Ruler. When preservation set up the mists, he was afraid of Ruin escaping his prison. In those early days before the Ascension, the mist began to snap people as they did during our time. But this action of the mist was one of the only ways to awaken allomancy in a person, for the genetic attributes were buried too deeply to be brought out by a simple beating. The mists of that day created mistings only, of course. There were no mistborn until the Lord Ruler made use of the nuggets. The people misinterpreted the mist's intent, as the process of snapping allomancers caused some, particularly the young and the old, to die. This hadn't been Preservation's desire, but he'd given up most of his consciousness to form Ruin's prison, and the mists had to be left to work as best they could without specific direction. Deism! Ruin, subtle as ever, knew that he couldn't stop the mists from doing their work. However, he could do the unexpected and encourage them, and so he helped make them stronger. That brought death to the plants of the world and created the threat that became known as the deepness. Dance fighting? That. Chapter 81. Vin turned toward Ruin, projecting a smile. The cloud of twisting black mist seemed agitated. So, can influence a single minion, Ruin snapped, turning open itself, rising in the air. Vin followed, streaking up to loom over the entire central dominance. Below, she could see Demo's soldiers rushing to the camp, waking the people, organizing them to flight. Already, some of them were making their way along the tracks in the ash toward the safety of the caverns. She could feel the sun, and knew that the planet was far too near it to be safe. Yet, do nothing more. Not only would ruin have stopped her, but she didn't understand her power yet. She felt as the Lord Ruler must have, almighty, yet clumsy. If she tried to move the world, she would only make things worse. But she had accomplished something. Ruin had his Koloss pounding toward them at breakneck speed, but they still wouldn't arrive at the pits for several hours. Plenty of time to get people to the caverns. Ruin must have noticed what she was studying, or perhaps he sensed her smugness. You think you've won? He asked, sounding amused. Why? Because you managed to stop a few Kandra? They were always the weakest of the minions the Lord Ruler created for me. I have made a habit of ignoring them. Either way, Finn, you cannot really think that you have beaten me. Finn waited, watching as the people fled to the relative safety of the caverns. Even as the bulk of them arrived, soldiers separating them into groups, sending them to the different entrances, her good humor began to fade. She had managed to get through to Elend, and while it had seemed like a great victory at the moment, she could now see that it was little more than another stalling tactic. I forgot to put that up. I'll be right back. Sorry. Let's do this from here. Ah. Ah. Alright, I want to be able to see what you guys are saying without squinting. The balls are the best part to find out about the deepness because of the stained glass windows. Those are. I need better headphoneness. That's my face. There we go. I was comfortable, but I didn't have to chat. Alright. I'm gonna lean back. Okay. Where was we? Something about balls and deepness. Dang it, Ufir. Uh, oh my gosh. Finn waited, watching as the people fled to the relative safety of the caverns. Even as the bulk of them arrived, soldiers separating them into groups, sending them to different entrances. Her good humor began to fade. She had managed to get through to Elend, and while it had seemed like a great victory at the moment, she could now see that it was little more than another stalling tactic. Have you counted the Koloss in my army, Vin? Rowan asked. I've made them from your people, you know. I've gathered hundreds of thousands. Vin focused, enumerating instantly. He was telling the truth. This is the force I could have thrown at you any time, Rowan said. Most of them kept to the outer dominances, but I've been bringing them in, marching them toward Luth. How many times must I tell you, Vin? You can't win! You could never win! Just been playing with you. Vin pulled back, ignoring his lies. He hadn't been playing with them. He'd been trying to discover the secrets that preservation had left, the secret that the Lord Ruler had kept. Still, the numbers Ruin had finally managed to marshal were awe inspiring. There were far more Koloss than there were people climbing into the caverns. With a force like that, Ruin could assault even a well fortified position, and by Vin's count, Elend had fewer than 1,000 men with any battle training. On top of that, there was the sun and its destructive heat, the death of the world's crops, the tainting of water and land with several feet of ash. Even the lava flows, which she had stopped, were beginning again, her plugging of the ash mounts having provided only a temporary solution. A bad one, even. Now that the mountains couldn't erupt, great cracks were appearing in the land, and the lava, the earth's burning blood, was boiling out that way. Just so far behind, Finn thought. Ruin had centuries to plan this. Even when we thought we were being clever, we fell for his plots. What good is it to sequester my people beneath the ground if they're just going to starve? She turned toward Ruin. Eat the mist wraiths. She turned toward Ruin, who sat, billowing and shifting upon himself, watching his Koloss army. She felt a hatred that seemed incompatible with the power she held. The hatred made her sick. She didn't let go of it. This thing before her, it would destroy everything she knew, everything she loved. It couldn't understand love. It built only so that it could destroy. At that moment, she reversed her earlier decision. She'd never again call Rowan a him. Humanizing the creature gave it too much respect. Seething, watching, she didn't know what else to do. So she attacked. She wasn't even certain how she did it. She threw herself at Ruin, forcing her power up against its power. There was friction between them, a clash of energy, and it tormented her divine body. Ruin cried out, and, mixing with Ruin, she knew its mind. Ruin was surprised. It didn't expect preservation to be able to attack. Finn's move smacked too much of destruction. Ruin didn't know how to respond, but it threw its power back against her in a protective flex. Their selves crashed. Their sleeves. Their selves crashed, threatening to dissolve. Finally, Finn pulled back, lacerated, rebuffed. Their power was too well matched, opposite, yet similar. Like allomancy. Opposition, Ruin whispered. Balance. You'll learn to hate it, I suspect, though preservation never could. So, this is the body of a god? Elend asked, rolling the bead of atium around in his palm. He held it up next to the one that Yeoman had given him. Indeed, your majesty, Sazed said. The terrorsman looked eager. Didn't he understand how dangerous their situation was? The Moe's scouts, the ones that had returned, reported that the Koloss were only minutes away. Elend had ordered his troops posted at the doorways to the homeland, but his hope that the Koloss wouldn't know where to find his people was a slim one, considering what Sazed had told him about Ruin. Sleeve fight. Oh, Ufir brought a t-shirt to a long sleeve fight. Ruin can't help but come for it, Sazed explained. They stood in the metal-lined cavern called the Trust Warren, the place where the Khandra had spent the last 1,000 years gathering and guarding the atium. This atium is part of him. It's what he's been searching for all this time. Means we'll have a couple 100,000 Koloss trying to climb down our throats, Sazed, Ellen said, handing back the bead of atium. I say we give it to him. Sazed paled. Give To him? Your Majesty, my apologies, but I mean the end of the world. Instantly, I'm certain of it. Great, Ellen thought. You will be all right, Ellen, Sazed said. Ellen frowned up at the terrorsman, who stood peacefully in his robes. Finn will come, Sazed explained. She is the hero of ages. She will arrive to save this people. You see how perfect this all is? It's arranged, planned. That you would come here, find me at this exact moment, that you'd be able to lead the people to safety in these caverns. Well, it all fits together. You'll come. Time for him to get his faith back, Ellen thought. He rolled Yeoman's bead between his fingers, thinking. Outside the room, he could hear whispers. People, terrace stewards, ska leaders, even a few soldiers, stood listening. Ellen could hear the anxiety in their voices. They had heard of the approaching army. As Ellen watched, Demoe carefully pushed his way through them and entered the room. Soldiers posted, my lord, the general said. How many do we have? Ellen asked. Demoe looked grim. 300 I brought with me, he said, plus about 500 from the city. Another 100 ordinary citizens that we armed with these Khandra hammers or spare weapons from our soldiers, and have 4 different entrances to this cavern complex we need to guard. Ellen closed his eyes. You'll come, Sazed said. My lord, Demoe said, pulling Ellen aside. This is bad. I know, Ellen said, exhaling softly. Did you give the men medals? What we could find, Demoe said quietly. Make sure you got plenty of brass and zinc, guys. What we could find. The people didn't need to bring powdered metal with them when they fled Luthadel. Captain Obvious Demoe. We found a couple of noblemen who were allomancers, but they were only copper clouds or seekers. Ellen nodded. He bribed or pressed the useful noblemen allomancers into his army already. We gave those medals to my soldiers, Demoe said, but none of them could burn them. Even if we had allomancers, we cannot hold this location, my lord. Dude, they're all freaking ATM burners. They're all ATM burners. Give them all the ATM and then just have them all eat it up. That's it. The end. All right, guys. Join us next week when we'll talk about the Wheel of Kings. Stream over. They've made. I did make fun of those allomancers earlier. They're all ATM burners. These guys are dumb. All right. I guess I'll have to Rafo. It's like so frustrating when I figure stuff out before the character sometimes. Especially when Vin could have used Mel ATM to find out that the Khandra was a Khandra. The Wheel of Kings. Whatever. Join us next week when we'll read Skyward 2. Sky Bird. The Way of Time. Alright, so they're all ATM burners. Next chapter. Alright. I've lost the page. We gave those medals to my soldiers, Demoe said, but none of them could burn them. Even if we had allomancers, we cannot hold this location, my lord. Not with so few soldiers. Not against that many Kolas. We'll delay them at first because of the narrow entrances. But, well, I realize that, Demoe, Ellen said with frustration. But do you have any other options? Demoe was silent. I was hoping you'd have some, my lord. On your ear, Ellen said. Demoe grew grim. Then we die. What about faith, Demoe? Ellen asked. I believe in the survivor, my lord, but, well, this looks pretty bad. I've felt like a man waiting his turn before the headsman ever since we spotted these Kolas. Maybe the survivor doesn't want us to succeed here. Sometimes people just have to die, or do secret stuff. Ellen turned away, frustrated, clenching and unclenching his fist. I just had the Arthur meme where he clenches his fist. And Ellen is basically Arthur, so skyward. Oh, jeez. Alan turned away, frustrated, clenching and unclenching his fist around the bead of atium. It was the same problem, the same trouble he always had. He'd failed back during the siege of Luthadel. It had taken Vin to protect the city. He'd failed in Fadric City. Only the Koloss getting distracted had rescued him there. A ruler's most basic duty was to protect his people. In this one area, Elend continually felt impotent, useless. Why can't I do it? Ellen thought with frustration. I spent a year searching out storage caverns to provide food, only to end up trapped with my people starving. I search all that time looking for the atium, hoping to use it to buy safety for my people. And I find it too late to spend it on anything. Too late. He paused, glancing back toward the metal plate on the floor. Years searching for atium. None of the metals Demo had given his soldiers had worked. Elend had been working under the assumption that Demo's group would be like the other Mistfallen back in Fadrix, that they'd be composed of all kinds of mistings. Yet, there had been something different about Demo's group. They had fallen sick for far longer than the others. Elend pushed forward, rushing past Sazed, grabbing a handful of beads, a vast wealth, unlike anything any man had ever possessed, valuable for its rarity, valuable for its economic power, valuable for its allomancy. Demo, he snapped, rising and tossing the bead to him. Eat this! Demo frowned. My lord? Eat it, Ellen said. Demo did as asked. Yeah, asked. He stood for a moment. 300 men, Ellen thought, sent away from my army because of all the ones who fell sick. They were the most sick. 16 days. 327 men, 1/16 of those who fell sick. 1 out of 16 allomantic metals. Yeoman had proven that there was such a thing as an ATM misting. If Ellen hadn't been so distracted, he would have made the connection earlier. If 1 out of 16 who fell sick remained that way for the longest, would that not imply that they'd gained the most powerful of the 16 abilities? You don't even know what the 16th ability is. How can you say that? How can you make that claim? Demo looked up, eyes widening, and Ellen smiled. Eat it. Okay. Alright, he figured that out. Only like 2 minutes after I did, so I'll give it to him. Finn hovered outside the cavern, watching with dread as the Koloss approached. Yeah, it didn't take too long. They were already in a blood frenzy. Ruin had that much control over them. There were thousands upon thousands of them. The slaughter was about to begin. Does Vin know that when they're in a blood frenzy, Ruin has less control over them? I think only Marsh figured that out. Or at least Vin and Ellen know that it's harder for them to control the Koloss when they're in a frenzy. They might not realize that it's harder for Ruin as well. Vin cried out as they drew closer, throwing herself against Ruin again, trying to drive her power to destroy the thing. As before, she was rebuffed. She felt herself screaming, trembling as she thought about the impending deaths below. It would be like the tsunami deaths on the coast, only worse. The Sanders tsunami deaths. For those were people she knew, people she loved. She turned back toward the entrance. She didn't want to watch, but she wouldn't be able to do anything else. Herself was everywhere. Even if she pulled her nexus away, she knew that she'd still feel the deaths, that they would make her tremble and weep. From within the cavern, echoing, she sensed a familiar voice. Today, men, I ask of you your lives. Vin hovered down, listening. Though she couldn't see into the cavern because of the metals and the rock, she could hear, however. If she'd had eyes, she would have been crying, she knew. I ask of you your lives, Ellen said, voice echoing, and your courage. I ask of you your faith and your honor, your strength, your compassion. For today, I lead you to die. I will not ask you to welcome this event. I will not insult you by calling it well, or just, or even glorious. But I will say this: each moment you fight is a gift to those in this cavern. Each second we fight is a second longer that thousands of people can draw breath. Each stroke of the sword, each koloss felled, each breath earned as a victory. Earned is a victory. It is a person protected for a moment longer, a life extended, an enemy frustrated. There was a brief pause. In the end, they will kill us, Ellen said, voice loud ringing in the cavern. But first, they shall fear us. The men yelled at this, and Vin's enhanced mind could pick out over 300 distinct voices. She heard them split, rushing toward the different cavern entrances. A moment later, someone appeared from the front entrance near her. A figure in white slowly stepped out into the ash, brilliant white cape fluttering. He held a sword in one hand. Elend! She tried to cry at him. No! Go back! Charging them is madness. You'll be killed! Ellen stood tall, watching the waves of Koloss as they approached, trampling down the black ash, an endless sea of death with blue skin and red eyes. Many carried swords, the others just bore rocks and lengths of wood. Elend was a tiny white speck before them, a single dot on an endless canvas of blue. He raised his sword high and charged. Elend! Suddenly, Elend burst with a brilliant energy, so bright that Vin gasped. He met the first Koloss head on, ducking beneath the swinging sword and decapitating the creature in one stroke. Then, instead of jumping away, he spun to the side, swinging. Another Koloss fell. 3 swords flashed around him, but all missed by just a breath. Elend ducked to the side, taking a Koloss in the stomach, then whipped his sword around, his head barely passing beneath another swing, and took off a Koloss arm. He still didn't push himself away. Vin froze, watching as he took down one Koloss, then beheaded another in a single fluid stroke. Elend moved with a grace she had never seen from him. She had always been the better warrior, yet at this moment, he put her to shame. He wove between Koloss blades as if he were taking part in a pre-rehearsed stage fight, body after body falling before his gliding blade. A group of soldiers in Ellen's colors burst from the cavern entrance, charging. Like a wave of light, their forms exploded with power. They, too, moved into the Koloss ranks, striking with incredible precision. Not a single one of them fell as Vin watched. They fought with miraculous skill and fortune, each Koloss blade falling just a little too late. Blue corpses began to pile up around the glowing force of men. Somehow, Ellen had found an entire army who could burn atium. Star, star, star. Elend was a god. He'd never burned atium before, and his first experience with the metal filled him with wonder. The koloss around him all emitted atium shadows, images that moved before they did, showing Elend exactly what they would do. He could see into the future, if only a few seconds. In a battle, that was just what one needed. He could feel the atium enhancing his mind, making him capable of reading and using all of the new information. He didn't even have to pause and think. His arms moved of their own volition, swinging his sword with awesome precision. He spun amid a cloud of phantom images, striking at flesh, feeling almost as if he were in the mist again. No koloss could stand against him. He felt energized, felt amazing. For a time, he was invincible. He swallowed so many atium beads he felt as if he'd throw up. For its entire history, atium had been a thing that men had needed to save and hoard. Burning it had seemed such a shame that it had been used only sparingly, only in instances of great need. Ellen didn't need to worry about any of that. He just burned as much as he wanted, and it made him into a disaster for the koloss. A whirlwind of exact strikes and impossible dodges, always a few steps ahead of his opponents. Foe after foe fell before him, and when he began to get low on atium, he pushed himself off a fallen sword back to the entrance. There, with plenty of water to wash it down, Sazed waited and another bag of atium. Sazed waited with another bag of atium. Ellen downed the beads quickly, then returned to the battle. Ruin raged and spun, trying to stop the slaughter. Yet, this time, Vin was the force of balance. She blocked Ruin's every attempt to destroy Ellen and the others, keeping it contained. Can't decide if you're a fool, Vin thought toward it, or if you simply exist in a way that makes you incapable of considering some things. Ruin screamed, buffeted against her, trying to destroy her as she had tried to destroy it. However, once again, their powers were too evenly matched. Ruin was forced to pull back. Life, Vin said. You said that the only reason to create something was so that you could destroy it. She hovered beside Elend, watching him fight. The deaths of the Kolas should have pained her, yet she did not think of the death. Perhaps it was the influence of preservation's power, but she saw only a man struggling, fighting, even when hope seemed impossible. She didn't see death, she saw life, saw faith. We create things to watch them grow, Rowan, she said. Take pleasure in seeing that which we love become more than it was before. You said that you were invincible, that all things break apart, all things are ruined. There are things that fight against you. And the ironic part is, you can't even understand those things. Love, life, growth. The life of a person is more than the chaos of its passing. Emotion ruin. This is your defeat. Sazed watched anxiously from the mouth of the cavern. A small group of men huddled around him. Garv, leader of the Church of the Survivor in Luthadel. Harithdal, foremost of the terrace stewards. Lord Dedry Vasting, one of the surviving assembly members from the city government. Asladin, the young woman whom Demo had apparently come to love during his short weeks at the pits of Hathsin. A smattering of others important or faithful enough to get near the front of the crowd and watch. Where is she, Master Terraceman? Grauerf asked. She'll come, Sazed promised, hand resting on the rock wall. The men fell quiet. Soldiers, those without the blessing of Atium, waited nervously with them, knowing they were next in line should Ellen's assault fail. She has to come, Sazed thought. Everything points toward her arrival. The hero will come, he repeated. Ellen sheared through two heads at once, dropping the Koloss. He spun his blade, taking off an arm, then stabbed another Koloss through the neck. He hadn't seen that one approaching, but his mind had seen and interpreted the ATM shadow before the real attack came. Already, he stood atop a carpet of blue corpses. He did not stumble. With ATM, his every step was exact. His blade guided, his mind crisp. He took down a particularly large Koloss, then stepped back, pausing briefly. The sun crested the horizon in the east. It started to grow hotter. They had been fighting for hours, yet the army of Koloss still seemed endless. Ellen saw another Koloss, but his motions were beginning to feel sluggish. Atium enhanced the mind, but it did not boost the body, and he'd started to rely on his pewter to keep him going. Who would have known that one could get tired, exhausted even, while burning atium? Nobody had ever used as much of the metal as Ellen had. But he had to keep going. His atium was running low. He turned back toward the mouth of the cavern just in time to see one of his atium soldiers go down in a spray of blood. Ellen cursed, spinning as an atium shadow passed through him. He ducked the swing that followed, then took off the creature's arm. He beheaded the one that followed, then cut another's legs out from beneath it. For most of the battle, he hadn't used fancy allomantic jumps or attacks, just straightforward swordplay. His arms were growing tired, however, and he was forced to begin pushing Koloss away from him to manage the battlefield. The reserve of atium, of life, within him was dwindling. Atium burned so quickly. Another man screamed, another soldier dead. Ellen began to back toward the cavern. There were just so many Koloss. His band of 300 had slain thousands, yet the Koloss didn't care. They kept attacking, a brutal wave of endless determination, resisted only by the pockets of atium mistings protecting each of the entrances to the homeland. Another man died. They were running out of atium. Ellen screamed, swinging his sword about him, taking down 3 Koloss in a maneuver that never should have worked. He flared steel and pushed the rest away from him. Body of a god burning within me, he thought. He gritted his teeth, attacking as more of his men fell. He scrambled up a pile of Koloss, slicing off arms, legs, heads, stabbing chests, necks, guts. He fought on, alone, his clothing long since stained from white to red. Something moved behind him, and he spun, raising his blade, letting the atium lead him. Yet he froze, uncertain. The creature behind him was no Koloss. It stood in a black robe, one eye socket empty and bleeding, the other bearing a spike that had been crushed back into its skull. Ellen could see straight into the empty eye socket, through the creature's head, out the back. Marsh. He had a cloud of atium shadows around him. He was burning the metal too, and would be immune to Ellen's own atium. What happens if you burn atium and electrum at the same time? That like you'd be like rip. Actually, that should pretty much be like burning atium and electrum against someone burning atium should be the same as like you burning atium and the other person not, because your electrum will cancel out their atium. You'll still have your atium. Yeah, it wouldn't be redundant, would it? I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. I would think that the electrum would cancel out Marsh's atium. Yeah, electrum shows you your own actions, but it also. I was told that it does directly cancel atium because that's what the book told me. I was told because I was told. Human led his Kolos soldiers through the tunnels. They killed any person in their path. Some had stood at the entrance. They had fought long. They had been strong. They were dead now. Something drove Human on. Something stronger than anything that had controlled him before. Stronger than the little woman with the black hair, though she had been very strong. This thing was stronger. It was ruin. Human knew this. He could not resist. He could only kill. He cut down another human. Human burst into a large open chamber filled with other little people. Controlling him, Ruin made him turn away and not kill them. Not that Ruin didn't want him to kill them, it just wanted something else more. Human rushed forward. He crawled over tumbled rocks and stones. He shoved aside crying humans. Other Kolos followed him. For the moment, all of his own desires were forgotten. There was only his overpowering desire to get to a small room. There, in front of him. Human threw open the doors. Ruin yelled in pleasure as he entered this room. It contained the thing Ruin wanted. Guess what I found? Marsh growled, stepping up, pushing against Ellen's sword. The weapon was ripped from his fingers, flying away. Atium. The conjurer was carrying it, looking to sell it. Foolish creature. Ellen cursed, ducking out of the way of a Kolos swing, pulling his obsidian dagger from the sheath at its leg. Marsh stalked forward. Men screamed, cursing, falling, as their atium died out. Ellen's soldiers were being overrun. The screams tapered off as the last of his men guarding this entrance died. He doubted the others would last much longer. Ellen's atium warned him of attacking Kolos, letting him dodge, barely, but he couldn't kill them very effectively with the dagger. And as the Kolos took his attention, Marsh struck with an obsidian axe. The blade fell, and Ellen leaped away, but the dodge left him off balance. Ellen tried to recover, but his metals were running low. Not just his atium, but his basic metals iron, steel, pewter. He hadn't been paying much attention to them since he had atium, but he'd been fighting for so long now. If Marsh had atium, then they were equal and without basic metals. Ellen would die. An attack from the Inquisitor forced Ellen to flare pewter to get away. He cut down 3 Kolos with ease, his atium still helping him, but Marsh's immunity was a serious challenge. The Inquisitor crawled over the fallen bodies of Kolos, scrambling toward Ellen, his single spike head reflecting the too bright light of the sun overhead. Ellen's pewter ran out. You cannot beat me, Ellen Venture, Marsh said in a voice like gravel. We've killed your wife. I will kill you. Vin. Ellen didn't believe it. Vin will come, he thought. She'll save us. Faith. It was a strange thing to feel at that moment. Marsh swung. Pewter and iron suddenly flared to life within Ellen. He didn't have time to think about the oddity. He simply reacted, pulling on his sword, which lay stuck into the ground a distance away. It flipped through the air, and he caught it, swinging with a too-quick motion, blocking Marsh's axe. Ellen's body seemed to pulse, powerful and vast. He struck forward instinctively, forcing Marsh backwards across the ashen field. Kolas backed away for the moment, shying from Elend as if frightened, awed. Marsh raised a hand to push on Ellen's sword, but nothing happened. It was as if something deflected the blow. Ellen screamed, charging, beating back Marsh with the strikes of his silvery weapon. The Inquisitor looked shocked as it blocked with the obsidian axe, its motions too quick for even Allomancy to explain. Yet, Ellen still forced him to retreat, across fallen corpses of blue, ash stirring beneath a red sky. Uh-oh. Getting hot. A powerful peace swelled in Elend. His allomancy flared bright, though he knew the metals inside of him should have burned away. Only atium remained, and its strange power could not, give him the other metals. But it didn't matter. For a moment he was embraced by something greater. He looked up toward the sun, and he saw, just briefly, an enormous figure in the air just above him, a shifting, brilliant personage of pure white, her hands held to his shoulders with her head thrown back, white hair streaming, mist flaring behind her like wings that stretched across the sky. Finn, he thought with a smile. Ellen looked back down as Marsh screamed and leaped forward, attacking with his axe in one hand, seeming to trail something vast and black like a cloak behind him. Marsh raised his other hand across his face, as if to shield his dead eyes from the image of the air above Ellen. Ellen burned the last of his atium, flaring it to life in his stomach. He raised his sword in two hands and waited for Marsh to draw close. The Inquisitor was stronger and was a better warrior. Marsh had the powers of both Allomancy and Feruchemy, making him another Lord Ruler. This was not a battle Ellen could win. Not with a sword. Marsh arrived, and Ellen thought he understood what it had been like for Kelsier to face the Lord Ruler on that square in Luthadel all those years ago. Marsh struck with his axe. Elend raised his sword in return and prepared to strike. Then, Elend burned Duralamin with his atium. Sight, sound, strength, power, glory, speed. Blue lines sprayed from his chest like rays of light, but those were all overshadowed by one thing: atium plus Duralamin. In a flash of knowledge, Elend felt a mind-numbing wealth of information. All became white around him as knowledge saturated his mind. I see now, he whispered as the vision faded, and along with it his remaining metals. Battlefield returned. He stood upon it, his sword piercing Marsh's neck. It had gotten caught on the spike head jutting out of Marsh's back between the shoulder blades. Marsh's axe was buried in Ellen's chest. The phantom metals Vin had given him burned to life within Ellen again. They took the pain away, however. There was only so much that pewter could do, no matter how high it was flared. Marsh ripped his axe free, and Ellen stumbled backward, bleeding, letting go of his sword. Marsh pulled the blade free from his neck, and the wound vanished, healed by the powers of Feruchemy. Ellen fell, slumping into a pile of Kolos bodies. He would have been dead already, save for the pewter. Marsh stepped up to him, smiling. His empty eye socket was wreathed in tattoos, the mark that Marsh had taken upon himself. The price he had paid to overthrow the final empire. Marsh grabbed Elend by the throat, pulling him back up. Your soldiers are dead, Elend Venture, the creature whispered. Our knowledge, our Kolas, rampage against the Khandra caverns. Your metals are gone. You have lost. Elend felt his life dripping away. The last trickle from an empty glass. He'd been here before, back in the cavern at the Well of Ascension. He should have died then, and he'd been terrified. This time, oddly, he was not. There was no regret, just satisfaction. Elend looked up at the Inquisitor. Finn, like a glowing phantom, still hovered above them both. Lost? Ellen whispered. We've won, Marsh. Oh? How is that? Marsh asked dismissively. Human stood at the side of the pit in the center of the cavern room, the pit where Ruin's body had been, the place of victory. Human stood dumbfounded, a group of other Kolas stepping up to him, looking equally confused. The pit was empty. Atium, Ellen whispered, tasting blood. Where's the atium, Marsh? Where do you think we got the power to fight? You came for that atium? Well, it's gone. Tell your master that. You think my men and I expected to kill all of these Kolas? There are tens of thousands of them. That wasn't the point at all. Ellen's smile widened. Ruin's body is gone, Marsh. We burned it all away, the others and I. You might be able to kill me, but you'll never get what you came for. And that is why we win. Marsh screamed in anger, demanding the truth, but Ellen had spoken it. The deaths of the others meant that they had run out of atium. His men had fought until it was gone, as Ellen had commanded, burning away every last bit. Body of a god, the power of a god. Ellen had held it for a moment. More important, he destroyed it. Hopefully, that would keep his people safe. It's up to you now, Vin, he thought, still feeling the peace of her touch upon his soul. Done what I can. He smiled at Marsh again, defiantly, as the Inquisitor raised his axe. Oh, but Vin can still save him, right? Like she could have saved him at the Well of Ascension, but didn't, but this time she will save him? You better. I'll be right back. Real quick this time. I won't even put up the AFK. What time is it? 2:16? Still got plenty of time. Okay. What's that from, Lamgwin? Is that from Psych? Down there. Okay. Oh, well, crap. It says right here the axe took off Ellen's head. Oh, man. Come on. He's like the anti Zane. Well, crap. Ellen can't die. It doesn't say he's dead yet. Alright. Until we get one from Ellen's perspective, we don't know for sure. Man, I'm sad now. Could be pulling a spook. Ruin raged and thrashed about, enraged and destructive. Vin only sat quietly, watching Ellen's headless body slump back into the pile of blue corpses. How do you like that? Ruin screamed. I killed him. I ruined everything you love. I took it from you. Vin floated above Ellen's body, looking down. She reached out with incorporeal fingers, touching his head, remembering how it had felt to use her power to fuel his allomancy. She didn't know what she had done. Something akin to what Ruin did when it controlled the Koloss, perhaps. Only opposite. Liberating. Serene. Ellen was... that say? Diad? Ellen was Diad? She knew that, and knew that there was nothing she could do. That brought pain, true, but not the pain she had expected. Let him go long ago, she thought, stroking his face. The Will of Ascension. Allomancy brought him back to me for a time. Yeah, but wasn't it preservation that stabbed him? Okay. She didn't feel the pain or terror she had known before when she thought him dead. This time she felt only peace. These last few years had been a blessing. an extension. She'd given Ellen up to be his own man, to risk himself as he wished, and perhaps to die. She would always love him, but she would not cease to function because he was gone. I was thinking with Vin, you know, having these god powers now, it would have made the relationship a little awkward. So I guess that's a convenient way to break it up. Break up his head from his body. Yeah, but this was off screen. The opposite, perhaps. Ruin floated directly above her, throwing down insults, telling her how it would kill the others Sazed, Breeze, Ham, Spook, even with his stupid beard. So few left of the original crew, she thought. Kelsier dead so long ago. Doxson and Clubb slaughtered at the Battle of Luthadel. Yaden dead with his soldiers. Oh, I forgot about him. Warser taken at Zane's command. Marsh fallen to become an inquisitor. And the others who joined us now gone as well. Indwell, and soon. Lind. Did Ruin think she would let their sacrifices be for nothing? She rose, gathering her power. She forced it against the power of Ruin as she had the other times, yet this time was different. When Ruin pushed back, she didn't retreat. She didn't preserve herself. She drove onward. The confrontation made her divine body tremble in pain. It was the pain of a cold and hot meeting, the pain of two rocks being smashed together and ground to dust. Their forms undulated and rippled in a tempest of power. Finn drove on. Preservation could never destroy you, she thought, almost screaming it against the agony. He could only protect. That's why he needed to create humankind. All along, Ruin, this was part of his plan. Didn't give up part of himself, making himself weaker simply so that he could create intelligent life. He knew he needed something of both preservation and of ruin, something that could both protect and destroy, something that could destroy to protect. He gave up his power at the well and into the mist, giving it to us so that we could take it. He always intended this to happen. You think this was your plan? It was his. His all along. Ruined cried out. Still, she drove on. You created the thing that can kill you, Ruin, Vin said, and you just made one huge final mistake. You shouldn't have killed Elend. See, he was the only reason I had left to live. She didn't shy back, though the conflict of opposites ripped her apart. Ruin screamed in terror as the force of her power completely melded with Ruin's. Her consciousness, now formed and saturated with preservation, moved to touch that of Ruin. Neither would yield, and with a surge of power, Vin bid farewell to the world, then pulled Ruin into the abyss with her. Their two minds puffed away like mist under a hot sun. Speaking of hot sun, by the way, what are they gonna do? Like, the world's still exploding, guys, and now there's nobody to fix it. What the heck? Is it actually just like everything just gonna blow up now? Oh gosh. Maybe you could have fixed some earthquakes or something, or moved the moved the planet farther from the sun before you did that, Vin. Typical Vin. Yeah. Just runs up. Oh man. Maybe the 16th elementic metal will restore the world. Huh? There was a point. Interesting. There was like a specific point where the epigraphs started referring to Vin in the third person. I swear that in earlier chapters. Well, I'll just read it. Once Vin died, the end came quickly. We were not prepared for it, but even all of the Lord Ruler's planning could not have prepared us for this. How did one prepare for the end of the world itself? What the crap? Wait, is there like. Oh, that's true, Kipton. Alright. Vinium. So. Alright. Time to have the world blow up. Doomsday Preppers. Is that about Y2K? Alright. Chapter 82. Sazed watched quietly from the mouth of the cavern. Outside, the Koloss raged and stomped about, looking confused. Most of the men who had been watching with Sazed had fled. Even most of the soldiers had retreated into the caverns, calling him a fool for waiting. Only General Demo, who had managed to crawl back to the cavern after his ATM ran out, remained just a few steps into the tunnel. Man was bloody. His arm ending in a tourniquet, his legs crushed. Singular leg crushed. He coughed quietly, waiting for Asledin to return with more bandages. Outside, the sun rose into the sky. The heat was incredible, like an oven. Cries of pain echoed from deep within the cavern behind Sazed. Koloss were inside. He'll come, Sazed whispered. He could see Ellen's body. It had fallen back down the pile of Koloss corpses. It was stark, bright white and red against the black and blue of the Koloss and ash. Finn will come, Sazed said insistently. Demo looked dazed. Too much blood lost. He slumped back, closing his eyes. Koloss began to move toward the cavern mouth, though they didn't have the direction or frenzy they'd displayed before. The hero will come, Sazed said. Outside, something appeared, as if from mists, then slumped down in the bodies beside Ellen's corpse. It was followed immediately by something else, a second figure, which also fell motionless. There, Sazed thought, scrambling out of the cavern. He dashed past several Koloss. They tried to swing for him, but Sazed were his metal mines. He felt he should have his copper mines to use in case he needed to record something important. Something like the end of the world. He did care about canning food. Blah, 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 blah. He wore his 10 rings, the ones he'd used to fight during the siege of Luthadel, for he knew that he might need them. He tapped a bit of steel and dodged the Koloss attacks. He moved quickly through the massive, confused-looking Koloss, climbing over bodies, moving up to the scrap of white cloak that marked Ellen's resting place. His corpse was there, headless. A small body lay beside his. Sazed fell to his knees, grabbing Vin by the shoulders. Beside her, atop the pile of dead Koloss, lay another body. It was that of a man with red hair, one whom Sazed did not recognize, but he ignored it. Ruin has red hair. That's fun. For Vin was not moving. No, he thought, checking for a pulse. There was none. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful, but very, very dead. And not be, he yelled, shaking her body again. Several Koloss lumbered toward him. He glanced upward. The sun was rising. It was getting hard to breathe for the heat. He felt his skin burning. By the time the sun reached its zenith, it would likely be so hot the land would burn. If only you had some kind of metal mine that you could store that would take away heat. And I'm so good at using these superpowers. I don't know if it would actually keep him from getting, like, radioactive burns, though. It would be good for one person's. Jeez, Tori, you got something? Got something to say, Tori? Alright. Is this how it ends? He screamed toward the sky. Your hero is dead. Rowan's power may be broken. The Koloss may be lost to him as an army. But the world will still die. The ash had killed the plants. The sun would burn away anything that remained. There was no food. Sazed blinked out tears, but they dried on his face. This is how you leave us? He whispered. And then he felt something. He looked down. Finn's body was smoking slightly. Not from the heat. It seemed to be leaking something. Or no, it was connected to something. The twists of mist he saw. They led to a vast white light. He could just barely see it. He reached out and touched the mist and felt an awesome power of stability. To the side, the other corpse, the one he didn't recognize, was also leaking something, a deep black smoke. Sazed reached out with his other hand, touching the smoke, and felt a different power, more violent, power of change. He knelt, stunned, between the bodies, and only then did it start to make sense. He's always used the gender neutral, he thought, so that they could refer to either a man or a woman, we assumed. Or perhaps because they referred to a hero who wasn't really either one? He stood up. The sun's power overhead felt insignificant compared to the twin, yet opposite powers that surrounded him. The hero would be rejected of his people, Cesar thought, yet he would save them. Not a warrior, though he would fight. Not born a king, but would become one anyway. He looked upward again. This what you planned all along? He tasted of the power, but drew back, daunted. How could he use such a thing? He was just a man. In the brief glimpse of forces that he touched, he knew that he'd have no hope of using it. He didn't have the training. Can't do this, he said through cracked lips, reaching to the sky. I don't know how. I cannot make the world as it was. I never saw it. Take this power, I will do as the Lord Ruler did, and will only make things worse for my trying. Simply a man. Bolas cried out in pain from the burning. Heat was terrible, and around Sazed trees began to pop and burst into flames. His touch on the twin powers kept him alive, he knew, but he did not embrace them. I am not the hero, he whispered, still reaching to the sky. His arms twinkled golden. His copper mines worn on his forearms reflected the light of the sun. They had been with him for so long. His companions. His knowledge. Knowledge. Words of the prophecy were very precise, he thought suddenly. They say. They say that the hero will bear the future of the world on his arms. Not on his shoulders. Not in his hands. On his arms. Forgotten gods! He slammed his arms into the twin mists and seized the powers offered to him. He drew them in, feeling them infuse his body, making him burn. His flesh and bones evaporated, but as they did, he tapped his copper mines, dumping their entire contents into his expanding consciousness. The copper mines, now empty, dropped with his rings to the pile of blue corpses beside the bodies of Vin, Elend, and Ruin's nameless body. Sazed opened eyes as large as the world itself, drawing in power that latticed all of creation. Hero will have the power to save the world, but he will also have the power to destroy it. We never understood. He wouldn't simply bear the power of preservation. He needed the power of ruin as well. Powers were opposites. As he drew them in, they threatened to annihilate each other, and yet, because he was of one mind on how to use them, he could keep them separate. They could touch without destroying each other, if he willed it. For these two powers had been used to create all things. If they fought, they destroyed. If they were used together, they created. Understanding swelled within him. Over 1,000 years, the keepers had collected the knowledge of mankind and stored it in their copper mines. They had passed it down from keeper to keeper, each man or woman carrying the entire bulk of knowledge, so that he or she could pass it on when necessary. Sazed had it all. And in a moment of transcendence, he understood it all. He saw the patterns, the clues, the secrets. Men had believed and worshipped for as long as they had existed, and within those beliefs, Sazed found the answers he needed, gems hidden from ruin in all the religions of mankind. There had been a people called the Bennett. They had considered map-making to be a solemn duty. Sazed had once preached their religion to Kelsier himself. From their detailed maps and charts, Sazed discovered how the world had once looked. I wonder if that's somehow connected to how Kelsier found the Malatium. Like, I don't know if this is expressly said, but I kind of figured that Kelsier broke into one of the storage caches and read about Malatium. I wonder if it had something to do with Sazed giving him a map. I don't know. He used his powers to restore the continents and oceans, the islands and coastlines, the mountains and rivers. And if you like that coastline of Norway, you can thank Slarta Bartfist. There had been a people known as the Nalazen. They had worshipped the stars, had called them the thousand eyes of their god, Trell, watching them. Sazed remembered well offering their religion to the young Vin while she had sat captive, undergoing her first haircut with the crew. From the Nelazan, the keepers had recovered star charts and had dutifully recorded them, even though scholars had called them useless, since they hadn't been accurate since the days before the ascension. Yet, from these star charts and from the patterns and movements of the other planets in the solar system they outlined, Sazed could determine exactly where the world was supposed to sit in orbit. He put the planet back into its old place, not pushing too hard as the Lord Ruler once had, for he had a frame of reference by which to measure. Good job, Lamgwin. There had been a people known as the Kanzi who had worshipped death. They had provided detailed notes about the human body. Sazed had offered one of their prayers over the bodies they had found in Vin's old crew hideout, back when Kelsier had still lived. From the Kanzi teachings about the body, Sazed determined that the physiology of mankind had changed, either by the Lord Ruler's intention or by simple evolution, to adapt to breathing ash and eating brown plants. In a wave of power, Sazed restored the bodies of men to the way they had been before, leaving each person the same, yet fixing the problems that living for 1,000 years on dying world had caused. He didn't destroy men, warping and twisting them as the Lord Ruler had when he'd created the Khandra, for Sazed had a guide by which to work. He learned other things too, dozens of secrets. One religion worshipped animals, and from it Sazed drew forth pictures, explanations, and references regarding the life that should have lived on the earth. He restored it. From another, the Drada, the religion he had preached to clubs before the man died, Sazed learned about colors and hues. It was the last religion Sazed had ever taught, and with its poems about color and nature, he could restore the plants, sky, and landscape to the way they had once been. Every religion had clues in it, for the faiths of men contained the hopes, loves, wishes, and lives of the people who had believed them. Finally, Sazed took the religion of the Lashta, the religion that Kelsier's wife, Mare, had believed in. Its priests had composed poetry during their times of meditation. From these poems, and from a scrap of paper that Mayer had given to Kelsier, who had given it to Vin, who had given it to Sazed, he learned of the beautiful things that the world had once held, and he restored flowers to the plants that had once borne them. The religions in my portfolio weren't useless after all, he thought, the power flowing from him in remaking the world. None of them were. They weren't all true, but they all had truth. Sazed hovered over the world, changing things as he felt he must. He cradled the hiding places of mankind, keeping the caverns safe, even if he did move them about, as he reworked the world's tectonics. Finally, he exhaled softly, his work finished, and yet power did not evaporate from him as he had expected it to. Rashek and Vin only touched small pieces of it at the Well of Ascension, he realized. I have something more, something endless. Ruin and preservation were dead, and their powers had been joined together. In fact, they belonged together. How had they been split? Rafo. Someday, perhaps, he would discover the answer to that question. Somebody would need to watch over the world, care for it, now that its gods were gone. It wasn't until that moment that Sazed understood the term hero of ages. Not a hero that came once in the ages, but a hero who would span the ages. A hero who would preserve mankind throughout all its lives and times. Neither preservation nor ruin, but both. God. The end. And the epilogue has an epigraph. That was pretty cool. Let's see, did we purge all the spoilers? Dang, dude, you timed them out for 10 minutes. How had they been split? Rafo. GG. All right. Let's we got to watch the credits and see what percent we got. Make sure we got a hundo. Finn was special. Preservation chose her from a very young age, as I have mentioned. I believe that he was grooming her to take his power. Yet the mind of preservation was very. I gotta say, I should have realized that the epigraphs were written by Sazed? Because all the epigraphs are written by Terraceman. Stupid Dave. All right. And he was like also in the thick of it in the action. I think that's why I assumed it was Vin before, because it was so personal to what was happening in this story. But yeah, we'll talk about that during the episode. Wow. Thanks for spoiling books that I don't even know exist. Uh, what made him choose this girl? Oh, you're talking about Mistborn, the Final Empire. Yeah, I'm an idiot. But no, that was written by. Oh yeah, that's right. It was Alendi, wasn't it? Or all right, I'm dumb. Yeah, you're right. They're written by Alendi in the first book. Never mind. I'm not as dumb as I thought, but maybe now I am. Need to reevaluate this. All right. Preservation chose her from a very young age, as I have mentioned. I believe that he was grooming her to take his power. Yet the mind of Preservation was very weak at that point, reduced only to the fragment that we know as the Mist Spirit. What made him choose this girl? Was it because she was a Mistborn? Was it because she had snapped so early in life, coming to her powers even as she went through the pains of the unusually difficult labor her mother went through to be her to bear her? She like snapped during birth? Dang. Finn was unusually talented and strong with Allomancy, even from the beginning. I believe that she must have drawn some of the mist into her when she was still a child, in those brief times when she wasn't wearing the earring. Preservation had mostly gotten her to stop wearing it by the time Kelsier recruited her, though she put it back in for a moment before joining the crew. Then she'd left it there at his suggestion. Freaking Kelsier, man. Nobody else could draw upon the mists. I have determined this. Why were they open to Vin and not others? I suspect that she couldn't have taken them all in until after she touched the power at the Well of Ascension. It was always meant, I believe, to be something of an attuning force, something that, once touched, would adjust a person's body to be able to accept the mists. Yet, she did make use of a small crumb of Preservation's power when she defeated the Lord Ruler. A year before, she even began hearing the thumping of the power's return to the well. Secret stuff. There is so much more to this mystery. Perhaps I will tease it out eventually as my mind grows more and more accustomed to its expanded nature. Perhaps I will determine why I was able to take the powers myself. For now, I only wish to make a simple acknowledgement of the woman who held the power just before me. Of all of us who touched it, I feel she was the most worthy. Epilogue. Spook awoke from the nightmare, then sat up. The cavern around him was dark, lit only by candles and lamps. He stood, stretching. Around him, people gasped. He walked past them, seeking out his friends. The cavern was packed, holding everyone from Urto who had been willing to come and hide. As such, it was difficult for Spook to pick his way through the shuffling, coughing, chatting bodies. As he walked, whispers grew louder, and people stood following. Beldra came running up to him, wearing a white dress. Spook? She asked in wonder. What happened? He just smiled, putting his arm around her. They made their way to the front of the cavern. Bree sat at a table. Of course, he would have furniture, while pretty much everyone else sat on the rock floor. Spook smiled at him, and the soother raised an eyebrow. You're looking well, my boy, Breeze said, taking a drink of his wine. You could say that, Spook said. That's all you're going to say? Belger said to Breeze. Look at him. He's been healed. Breeze shrugged, putting down his wine and standing. My dear, with all the oddities that have been happening lately, young Spook's appearance doesn't measure up. Simple healing? Why, that's rather mundane if you ask me. Breeze smiled, catching Spook's eye. Shall we then? Spook asked. Breeze shrugged. Why not? What do you think we'll find? I'm not sure, Spook admitted, stepping into the antechamber beyond the cavern. He started to climb the ladder. Spook, Belger said warily. You know what the scouts said. The entire city was burning from the heat of the sun. Spook looked up, noting the light shining between the cracks of the trapdoor. He smiled, then pushed it open. There was no city outside, just a field of grass. Green grass. Spook blinked at the strange sight, then crawled out onto the soft earth, making room for Breeze. The soother's head popped out, then cocked to the side. Now, there's the sight, he said, crawling out beside Spook. Spook stood up in the grass. It came up to his thighs. Green, such a strange color for plants. And the sky, Breeze said, shading his eyes. Blue. Not a hint of ash or smoke. Very odd. Very odd indeed. I'll bet Vin had something to do with this mess. That girl never could do things the proper way. Spook heard a gasp from behind and turned to see Beldra climbing out of the cavern. He helped her step up onto the ground. Then they walked in silent wonder through the tall grass. The sun was so bright overhead, yet it wasn't uncomfortably hot. What happened to the city? Beldra whispered, holding Spook's arm. He shook his head. Then, however, he heard something. He turned, thinking he saw motion on the horizon. He walked forward, Beldra at his side, Breeze calling down for Alrianne to come up and see what had happened. Are those people? Beldra asked, finally seeing what Spook had. The people in the distance saw them, too, and as they soon drew close, Spook smiled and waved at one. Spook? Ham called. Kid, is that you? Spook and Beldra hurried forward, Ham with the others, and behind them Spook could see another trapdoor in the middle of the grassy meadow floor. People he didn't recognize, some wearing uniforms from Ellen's army, were climbing out. Ham rushed over, wearing his usual vest and trousers, and grabbed Spook in an embrace. Ham hug. What are you doing here? Ham asked, letting go. I don't know, Spook said. Last I knew, I was in her tow. Ham looked up at the sky. I was in Fadrix. What happened? Spook shook his head. I don't know if the places we used to know have meaning anymore, Ham. Ham nodded, turning as one of the soldiers pointed. Another batch of people was emerging from a hole a short distance away. Spook and Ham walked forward, at least until Ham saw someone in the other batch of people. Spook vaguely recognized her as Ham's wife, who had been back in Luthadel. Wait, I can remember her name. Daria. I feel like, oh, what the heck's her name? Linda Bell. Oh, man. Whatever. Rafo? It's not Rafo. It's read. It's like go back and read book 1 and find out. Rafo. Her name is Vin. The thug let out a cry of excitement, then rushed forward to greet his family. Spook made his way from hole to hole. There appeared to be 6 of them, some well populated, others not so much. One stood out. It wasn't a trap door like the others, but a slanted cave entrance, so it's the storage caches plus the Conjure homeland. Here he found General Demo speaking with a small group of people, a pretty terrace woman holding his arm. I was in and out of consciousness for it, Demo was saying, but I saw him, the survivor. It had to be him, hanging in the sky, glowing. Waves of color moved through the air, and the ground trembled, the land spinning and moving. He came, just like Sazed said he would. Sazed? Spook spoke up, Demo noticing him for the first time. Sazed? Where is he? Demo shook his head. I don't know, Lord Spook. Then he paused. Where did you come from, anyway? Spook ignored the question. The openings and holes formed a pattern. They formed the number 16. The openings and holes formed a pattern. Spook walked through the thick grass, leading Beldra, making his way to the very center of the pattern. The wind blew softly, bending the stalks of grass in wave-like undulations. Ham and Breeze rushed to catch up to him, already arguing about something trivial. Ham with a child on one arm, his other arm around his wife's shoulders. Spook froze as he caught sight of a bit of color in the grass. He held up a hand, warning the others, and they stepped forward more quietly. There, in the center of the grass, was a field of somethings, colorful somethings, growing from the ground with tops like bright colored leaves. They were shaped like upside down bells with long, straight stalks. The petals at the top opened toward the sun, as if reaching for its light and gaping to drink it in. Beautiful, Beldra whispered. Spook stepped forward, moving among the plants. Flowers, he thought, recognizing them from the picture Vin had carried. Elsier's dream finally came true. At the center of the flowers, he found two people. Vin lay wearing her customary mist cloak, shirt, and trousers. Elend was in a brilliant white uniform, complete with cape. Head duct taped on. Uh, they were holding hands as they lay amid the flowers, and they were both dead. Spook knelt beside them, listening to Ham and Breeze cry out. They examined the bodies, checking for vital signs, but Spook focused on something else, almost hidden in the grass. He picked it up, a large leather tome. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. He opened it, reading the first page. I am, unfortunately, the hero of ages, read the delicate, careful letters. That sounds familiar. Spook thought he recognized the handwriting. As he flipped through the book, a slip of paper fell free. Spook picked it up. One side had a faded drawing of a flower, the very picture he'd been thinking about moments before. On the other side was a note, scrawled in the same handwriting as the book. Spook, it read. I tried to bring them back, but apparently fixing the bodies doesn't return the souls. Oh, there you go. It was duct taped on. I will get better at this with time, I expect. However, be assured that I have spoken with our friends, and they are quite happy where they are. They deserve a rest, I think. The book contains a short record of the events that led up to the world dying and being reborn, along with some musings I have made about the history, philosophy, and science of recent occurrences. If you look to your right, you will find a much larger group of books in the grass. These contain all of the knowledge, repeated verbatim, that was contained in my metal mines. Let the knowledge of the past not be forgotten. Rebuilding will be difficult, I think, but likely far easier than living beneath the Lord Ruler or surviving Rowan's attempt to destroy the world. I think you will be surprised at the number of people who fled to the storage caverns. Rashek planned very well for this day. He suffered much beneath Rowan's hand, but he was a good man who ultimately had honorable intentions. You did well. Know that the message you sent via Captain Gordell saved us all in the end. Sort of. I still feel like Marsh would have figured it out. The people will need leadership in the years to come. Likely they will look to you. I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person to help you, but know that I am about. I have made you mistborn and healed the damage you did to your body by flaring tin so much. I hope you don't mind. It was Kelsier's request, actually. Consider it a parting gift from him. Watch over them for me. P.S. There are still two metals that nobody knows about. You might want to poke about and see if you can figure out what they are. The end question mark. I think they'll interest you. Spook looked up, staring at the strangely empty blue sky. Belger came over and knelt beside him, looking over his paper, then giving him a quizzical look. You look troubled, she said. Spook shook his head. No, he said, folding up the little slip of paper and putting it in his pocket. No, I'm not troubled. In fact, I actually think everything is going to be all right. Finally.